What if we told you there's a silent crisis unfolding right in front of us? One we've been too afraid, too distracted, or too politically cautious to face. Across classrooms, workplaces, and homes, a generation of men is falling behind, emotionally adrift, disconnected from fatherhood, and unsure what it even means to be a man today. We're quick to critique toxic masculinity, but dangerously slow to offer boys and men something better. Are we ignoring them? Worse, are we abandoning them? It's time to stop whispering about the male malaise and start asking, what kind of future are we building without them? When we talk about social progress today, especially in liberal democracies, we tend to focus, rightly, on the removal of barriers for women and girls. That conversation has been transformative, but in our justified rush to level the playing field for half of the population, we've failed to notice what's happening to the other half. Specifically, we've overlooked the growing crisis facing boys and men. It's not just a handful of disconnected anecdotes or isolated statistics, it's a pattern. A generation of men is quietly falling behind, and the consequences are beginning to ripple across our societies. Let's start with education. In almost every advanced economy, girls are outperforming boys in the classroom. They get better grades, are more likely to graduate from high school, and are enrolling in and completing college at significantly higher rates. In the US, for instance, women make up about 60% of college students. That's not a minor imbalance, it's a major shift. And yet, there's been remarkably little public concern. Imagine if the gender gap were reversed. If girls were the ones being outpaced and outnumbered, there would be panels, policies, and national conversations, but because it's boys, we shrug. We tell ourselves they'll catch up, or worse, that they don't need the help. But they do, because education is the foundation on which so many other life outcomes are built. When boys disengage from school early, and many do, they're far more likely to struggle later. They're less likely to get good jobs, more likely to drift in and out of the labor market, and more vulnerable to the emotional toll that comes with that lack of purpose. The old model of manhood, provider, protector, breadwinner, is fading, but we haven't offered a viable alternative. So instead of evolving, many men are withdrawing. We can see this withdrawal in the labor market, where men are disappearing from work at a scale that should alarm us. In the US, 1 in 3 men without a college degree is now out of the labor force. That's not just unemployment, it's complete disengagement. Many of these men aren't looking for work anymore. They're living on disability benefits or with parents, or cycling through low-wage, unstable jobs with long stretches of inactivity in between. This isn't just an economic problem, it's a social and psychological one. Work has long been a source of structure and identity for men, and when that disappears, it leaves a vacuum. And what fills that vacuum? For some, it's loneliness and despair. Rates of suicide among men are rising, especially in midlife. Men are more likely to die from alcohol causes, more likely to overdose, and more likely to say they have no close friends. These are not fringe statistics. They are signals of a deeper malaise, a quiet, chronic pain that too often goes unnoticed or unspoken. Because many men are still taught that expressing vulnerability is weakness, that asking for help is shameful, so they suffer in silence. What's particularly troubling is that these issues don't fit neatly into our usual political or cultural frameworks. Some on the left are hesitant to talk about struggling men, afraid it might distract from the fight for women's equality. Some on the right invoke the crisis only to roll back women's gains or reassert outdated gender roles. Neither approach is helpful. We need to look at this problem with clear eyes and open minds. The suffering of men does not erase the progress of women. Both truths can coexist. And if we care about the health of our families, our communities, and our future, we can't afford to ignore what's happening to this generation of men. Because the pain we fail to acknowledge today will shape the society we live in tomorrow. This is not about victimhood. It's not about men demanding sympathy or asserting grievance. It's about paying attention. We cannot solve a problem we refuse to look at. The reality is, boys and men are struggling in ways that are deeply systemic, yet consistently overlooked. And I want to be very clear here. Recognizing the specific challenges that males face does not in any way diminish the importance of continuing to support and advance the rights and well-being of women and girls. These are not mutually exclusive priorities. In fact, I'd argue they're interdependent. A society where men are falling behind is not one in which women will ultimately thrive either. Let's start with education. Boys are now far more likely than girls to struggle in school. They are more likely to be diagnosed with behavioral disorders, more likely to be suspended or expelled, and less likely to graduate. In the US, for every 100 women earning a bachelor's degree, only about 74 men do. And the gap is growing. This isn't just a question of academic achievement. It's a foundation for opportunity, for confidence, for identity. When boys consistently see themselves as underperforming, or worse, as problems to be managed, that perception becomes internalized. We've built an education system that, often unintentionally, caters better to the developmental pace and behavior patterns of girls. That's not a critique. It's an observation we need to respond to, not ignore. Now consider the labor market. Men, especially those without college degrees, are increasingly disconnected from work. Labor force participation among prime-age men has declined steadily for decades. In the United States, nearly 1 in 7 men between the ages of 25 and 54 is neither working nor looking for work. That is not normal. That is not inevitable. And it's not just an economic problem. It's a social and psychological one. Work has long been a central source of identity and purpose for men, and when it disappears, what's left? For many, the answer is a quiet, invisible despair. Add to this the rising crisis of male mental health. Suicide rates among men are several times higher than among women, particularly in midlife. Men are less likely to seek help, less likely to talk about their struggles, and more likely to cope in destructive ways through substance abuse, withdrawal, or aggression. Our mental health systems, as well as our broader cultural narratives, are not built to engage men effectively. We've made enormous strides in destigmatizing mental health conversations, but too often, those conversations are still not reaching the men who need them most. Here's the core problem. We don't have a policy framework for addressing these issues. We don't have a coherent strategy to support boys who are falling behind in school, men who are dropping out of the workforce, or fathers who are cut off from their children. When policymakers talk about equity, gender is almost always coded as women. That's understandable given the long history of women's exclusion. But it's also incomplete. Equity must mean addressing disadvantage wherever it appears, even when, and perhaps especially when, it appears in places that don't fit our preconceptions. We need real practical interventions. We need more male teachers in elementary and middle schools, not because boys can't learn from women, but because boys need role models who reflect their own potential. We need more flexible education pathways, including vocational and technical training that recognize different ways of learning and different definitions of success. We need to fund mental health services that are culturally competent in engaging men, programs that meet them where they are, not where we wish they were. And we need to rethink policies on fatherhood, parenting time, and family support to ensure that men are not sidelined from their own children's lives. This isn't about giving men a break, it's about giving them a chance. A crucial piece of this puzzle, one we too often overlook, is the role of fatherhood. For many men, especially those in working class communities, fatherhood has been central to their sense of identity, purpose, and place in the world. Being a dad was not just a personal role, it was a public one. It connected men to their families, their communities, and their futures. But today, that anchor is loosening. We are seeing a quiet unraveling of fatherhood in many parts of society. And the cost of that is not only being paid by children and mothers, it's being paid by the men themselves. The statistics are stark. In the US, for example, around 1 in 4 fathers do not live with their children. For Black fathers, that number is closer to 1 in 2. And while we often speak rightly about the impact of father absence on children, we rarely ask what this absence does to the fathers. When a man becomes disconnected from his children, he doesn't just lose access to them, he often loses a vital part of himself. The relationship between fatherhood and male well-being is deeply reciprocal. Fathers are good for kids, yes, but kids are also good for fathers. This disconnection is being driven by a combination of economic, legal, and cultural shifts. Economically, the decline in stable, decently paid employment, especially for men without a college degree, has made it harder for many men to fulfill the traditional provider role. That's not to say men shouldn't embrace broader roles, emotional or domestic ones, but it's to recognize that in many communities, work and fatherhood have historically gone hand in hand. When stable work disappears, the role of father can begin to feel unearned or inaccessible. Men feel they have nothing to offer, and when that sense of inadequacy sets in, it's easy to step back. Legally, our systems don't always help. In many countries, including my own, the law treats unmarried fathers as a kind of optional extra, only recognizing paternal rights once they've been proven or earned, often through lengthy court processes. This setup creates barriers to involvement for men who are already struggling. We should be doing more to make it easier, not harder, for fathers to remain connected to their children, particularly after separation or divorce. That connection shouldn't depend on marital status or income. And culturally, we've lost much of the language that once made fatherhood an aspirational role for men. We talk more about deadbeat dads than devoted ones. We focus more on failure than on possibility. That deficit framing feeds into the broader narrative that men are dispensable or replaceable in family life. In truth, most men want to be good dads, but they need to be shown that fatherhood is still a role society values and one that is within reach. This is not about returning to some idealized past where men went to work and women raised the kids. That world is gone and in many ways good riddance. What I'm talking about is a modern, inclusive, and active vision of fatherhood, one that embraces emotional presence as much as financial support, one that encourages fathers to change diapers, attend school plays, and talk openly with their sons and daughters. But we can't just expect this to happen on its own. We need to invest in it. We need policies that support paternity leave, legal reforms that protect paternal access, and cultural messages that make being a good dad something to strive for, not to shy away from. If we want to address the crisis among men, we cannot afford to treat fatherhood as an afterthought. It is one of the most powerful levers we have, not just for the well-being of children, but for the well-being of men themselves. Because when men are cut off from their children, they are cut off from a core part of their own humanity. What does it mean to be a man today? That's not a rhetorical question. It's a real one. And too few of us are willing to ask it, let alone answer it. For generations, masculinity came with a built-in script. Provide, protect, persevere. That script, for better or worse, shaped male identity. But in recent decades, that script has been torn up, some of it rightly so. The rigid, stoic, often domineering version of masculinity deserved critique. But in throwing out the old model, we forgot something vital. You can't replace something with nothing. We've become very good at telling boys and young men what not to. Don't be toxic, don't be controlling, don't dominate the conversation, don't suppress your emotions. But we've been far less effective at articulating what they should be. What does a good man look like in the modern world? What does it mean to be a strong man who is also kind, ambitious yet nurturing, emotionally intelligent but not fragile? Without this affirmative vision, we've left a vacuum, and vacuums don't stay empty for long. That vacuum is being filled by louder voices, some of them angry, some nihilistic, some seductive in their simplicity. Online influencers with millions of followers are ready with their own definitions of manhood, often rooted in dominance, aggression, or performative strength. And many young men, especially those who feel isolated, unheard, or directionless, are listening. Why? Because at least someone is talking to them. And when the mainstream conversation either ignores them or lectures them, it's no wonder they tune out. This isn't about endorsing those voices, but it is about understanding why they resonate. If you're a young man struggling in school, unsure of your place in the job market, disconnected from your father, and bombarded with messages that the future is female, where exactly do you see yourself fitting in? Who is giving you a roadmap to a meaningful life? Who is helping you translate your natural strengths into socially constructive roles? We need a new blueprint for masculinity, one that is aspirational, not apologetic, one that speaks to the deep desire in boys and men to be useful, respected, and needed. This doesn't mean going backward. It means evolving masculinity to match the world we live in now. It means recognizing that being a man can include it being emotionally present, being a caregiver, being vulnerable, and still being strong. It means holding up models of male success that don't rely on wealth, dominance, or sexual conquest, but on contribution, character, and connection. Let's talk about responsibility. For many men, their sense of worth is deeply tied to whether they feel needed. If we want to help men grow, we have to give them roles of real responsibility, not just in the workforce, but in families, communities, and classrooms. We also need to model a kind of masculinity that isn't afraid of care. The most powerful thing some boys will ever see is a man who shows up as a mentor, as a teacher, as a father, as a friend. And yes, resilience matters. But resilience isn't stoicism. It's not about bottling everything up until you explode or shut down. Resilience is learning how to struggle well. It's about being able to get back up when life knocks you down, yes, but also knowing when to ask for help. We should be teaching that. We should be celebrating that. We cannot afford to let masculinity be defined by those with the loudest microphones and the narrowest vision. If we truly care about our sons, our brothers, our fathers, and our friends, we have to show them a path forward that is both rooted and renewed, a version of manhood that invites them to grow, to lead, and to love, not just to fight, to win, or to retreat. Because when we fail to offer boys and men a positive vision of themselves, someone else will, and we may not like where that path leads.